Welcome to a GBA ranking video. If you don't know what the GBA is, the GBA is a competitive Pokemon league. This season, 14 teams drafted 10 Pokemon each, 1 Mega per team, and they go at it week to week with the foreknowledge of what their opponents are bringing and go head-to-head in a traditional sports league style leading up to playoffs and finals matches throughout the season. This video is going to go through the teams and give you kind of a breakdown of what's been going on in the past week and the general season for them and where I think they stack up as far as power goes. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like, comments, and things like that to help me improve the videos, make them better. And if you have any questions or interested in the GBA, please leave a comment below. Check out the links in the description and go check out the other GBA videos. And we're having a lot of fun this season. That said, let's go ahead and jump right into the rankings. The Deoxys stay at number 1. They won again, 3-0, +9 differential. You can't argue with that. It's just very basic stats. They are the best team mathematically in the league, and I think that week in and week out, they just show an ability to adapt to everything and just really do well. They've done a really good job this year of validating some of their draft picks. Snorlax having put in fantastic work all 3 weeks, and just amazingly so. It's really impressed me that no one has managed to just take that thing down when you consider the rampant number of physical fighting Pokemon in the league and just, you know, hard physical powerhouses. But Gubbs has played that Snorlax incredibly well, enough so that on multiple occasions he's gotten it in and been able to curse up because the other team just hasn't had options to work against him. I was also glad to see Heracross put in some work this week because it's a personal favorite of mine, and it was good to see it really just, you know, do some solid effort on a team that hasn't had as clear an offensive powerhouse this season as they've had last year. Hopefully we'll get to see more work out of it, but even if we don't, I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to take down the Deoxys from where they are now, as they're just the best of the best. The Oklahoma City Thunder come in at number 2 this week, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you the highlights video in this commentary isn't really going to do the match justice or their gameplay because they did great. They played an excellent game. They just didn't happen to do any super standout things. You know, they have a pretty consistent formula going in with minor variations like, you know, 1 or 2 different moves on Infernape, switching out the item every now and then just solid fundamental gameplay that get them through every week and is generally enough considering a solid draft pick lining out their team roster. You balance that with well-played games and you're going to have just a winning team with well-played games. Hat does his research every week. He comes in knowing his threats, how to take them out, and he does that through just very simple fundamentals. It's not the snazziest things in the world. They're not the and one of the GBA by any means. They're just a team that puts in the numbers and wins games. And they won another game, so they stay in the top, and they happen to go up because the rest of the top kind of scoots around, and they landed a solid number 2. The Sawsbucks are actually probably the only team on the list to lose a match and not only stay where they are, but actually go up just because of some of the losses of the other people. I think the Sawsbucks loss was a real clinch heartbreaker, and in no small part did have to do with the multiple disconnections throughout the match. While, you know, a stronger gameplay would have rendered those useless, as one turn should not necessarily have dictated the outcome of the match. In most Pokemon matches, one turn usually does dictate the Pokemon that go down and how the whole match flows. Very rarely, and only in the case of massive sweeps, do single turns end up being inconsequential. Unfortunately for the Sawsbucks, they were the consequence this week, as missing that Thunder and taking that extra 30 damage on Victini, who's been the star player this season and has done a great job for them, was enough to, in the end, take enough damage to take him out and leave them vulnerable to Heracross and the other Deoxys threats. It was a very close match, much closer than I thought it was going to be, and the Sawsbucks really impressed me. That's why I don't have a problem moving them up this week despite losing. I think Magnitude's definitely put in the work this season as far as correcting some of his draft errors. There are obviously some contracts he can't quite get rid of, but he's done very well with his new draft. So far, the picks really doing a lot of work for him. Cobalion, Cresselia and Victini specifically, all doing a lot of good work for them this week. That's also not to discount some old veterans like Greninja, who did great work with Grass Knot on the Gastrodon, and even though I don't believe it was intended to be used this way, the extra damage on the Snorlax because of its weight, Grass Knot ended up being an excellent move for that. And if Steve can keep doing those things, possibly with a little bit more intention, as like I said, I do doubt it was an intentional double use, but I could be wrong. It could have been an intentionally thought out plan, and if it was a great plan. Even if it wasn't, it was a great mistake, and it happened to work out in his favor, and I think caught a lot of people by surprise. I think the Sawsbucks are really set to do very well. They're in an incredibly tough conference, and I think that's unfortunate. I think if they were in the other conference, they would be set for a playoff win at this point, as pickings are slim over there. But in this one, it's a real tooth and nail battle, and it's still very early in the season. So I could be wrong, and things could heat up in the other conference, and the Sawsbucks could just start to blow things out in here. But right now, I think they're right there in the middle of the pack for domination in their conference, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they go for the rest of the season. The Boston Red Sox are going to go back up into the top four, and I think they have a pretty good chance of staying there this week. They may fluctuate on the border a little bit back and forth, but Superblaw really puts in the time and effort. If you listen to his narration, you hear him, specifically dictate that he's run calcs for very specific scenarios and planning, and he knows what his things can and can't take, and has really thought out a lot of the specific matchups. While he doesn't show the necessary multi-move foreplanning that some of the other people have put in, he does seem to have an incredible grasp on the immediate consequences and ramifications of what moves are going to do to other things, and the quick ability to add up several rounds of damage to figure out what steps he needs to take to get there. The problem just seems to be him luring the opponents into those setups. And that could just be a combination of playing opponents that don't fall for traps easily as much as his inability to set them up. However, none of that really matters because he's still winning. Hariyama's putting up great numbers for this season, and, that's saying something because it's a Hariyama in a season where, Mega Scizor are running around destroying things, and Hariyama is right on their tail for things. I do question bringing the Aegislash, but I questioned acquiring Aegislash in the trade, and I question Aegislash every week, as I think he's a little bit predictable, and even if you listen to Cooper's narration, he knows when he goes for the Thief on the King's Shield that it's coming, and he still does it because he's not really worried about it. There is no surprise element there. He just didn't care, and that's basically what you're getting when you play against an Aegislash now. I don't think that as many people are going to be as carefree about that, and I don't think it's going to put in the work, but we'll have to see. Nick might surprise me with some insane sets or some surprising Aegislash variations. More likely than not, though, I think Hariyama is just going to keep putting in work for this team. And hey, so far that's been enough. The Nido Kings came in with pretty much an expected win. Nothing extremely impressive about the gameplay, just standard, slightly altered movesets to tailor the opponent, slightly altered items, and just very basic, fundamental, impressive gameplay. No major mind-blowing things here anywhere that you're going to see. Just enough to win. That's all they needed. They didn't even necessarily need to put up a giant differential on the board. Just, putting another W in that column, and that's enough to get them moved up a spot with the vacuum of some other teams moving around. It's not enough to put them back up in the top four, as I think this should have been a week to dazzle people after a big loss last week. But as it stands, he did pretty well. Good enough to get a win, good enough to move up another spot. The Steelix came out big again this week, going for another huge swing, taking out a decisive win over another team that generally was, in my opinion, comparable. But this week, Swag just came in and showed him it was no contest and a complete shutdown. He absolutely did all of his homework throughout the week and planned things down to a T, pretty much shutting down anything Shady had coming at him. He also implemented just some really solid, slightly advanced tactics, like a 1-2-3 switch of setting up Regirock, posing the obvious threat of rocks, so that Shady would be lured into bringing Golbat in. And then when he does bring Golbat in, forcing him to defog, buying him an extra turn to switch in the Landorus, which really could be done with a double switch on both parts, but it's a little bit riskier, and that 1-2-3 maneuver is a lot more deliberate, planned, and just slightly more advanced technique that Shady fell for hook, line, and sinker. And, you know, that kind of foresight and planning is really impressive on the Steelix part, and I'm pretty much convinced that first week loss by the Steelix was just a major fluke, and then we're not going to be seeing that kind of thing anymore. Amongst that, and just my general praise for the team, no item Shaman is just a great abuse of the format here, knowing that the Crawdon was a threat, knowing that it would have knockoff, but doing the math ahead of time and figuring out that if he didn't run an item on Shaman, he could live the knockoff, and since Shaman has good offensive recovery moves like Giga Drain, it wouldn't matter because he could easily take out the Crawdon. And for what it's worth, physically defensive Shaman putting in a lot of work for the Steelix this week, and really just showing that Swagalift has the ability to come in and make a lot of things shine on his team. The Sharpedos dropped fairly handily, actually going down to the number 7 spot, which is a pretty big swing and not necessarily indicative of how bad they lost or anything like that. Just a lot of things around them shifted fairly significantly. Actually, I would say a fair amount of their loss could be chalked up to the momentum shift from their match being yet another match to disconnect this week, along with the Arizona Deoxys Saucebucks match, and the fact that after the disconnect, Tom really couldn't seem to get that same momentum that he had going beforehand, Fizz capitalizing on it much better. Momentum's been a big problem for the team, and while I do think they have the power and I think they make some solid plays, he's really going to have to focus on isolating win conditions and threats a little bit more, and just kind of figuring out a way for him to use his team to dictate the match. One of the things that really threw off his momentum this week that he's going to have to learn to look at is the fact that he came in offensively knowing the threats and how he was going to take them down, but not having thought into how he was going to react to their own offense, which left him without any real defensive safe switches to go into on moves. It's a thing he acknowledged in his commentary, but acknowledging it in your commentary and actually applying it to your gameplay the next week are two very different things, and that's something he's going to have to do if he wants to, you know, come in and move back up the rankings and perform better, especially considering next week's going to be a tough match for him. The Leafeon retain their commanding hold on the number 8 position, putting up another win, but again, not doing anything super impressive, actually struggling a little bit at times to set up their Rancor, which is sad because that's such a powerful part of their team and really seems to be a main thing that a lot of the elements of the team were drafted in mind of. And if he can't get that set up, that says a lot about the team and some of the problems they're going to be running into. Eventually, he did manage to get it set up, but it's the kind of thing where it was set up and very little was done with it and very little was utilized of it at the end. I mean, later on in the season, if they run to the Grand Bulls and things like that, yes, absolutely, the rank could be a huge asset to them. But right now, he's really going to need to get that down and figure out a way to implement that early game and take advantage of it more. With 3 of the best Pokemon in the game taking advantage of Rain in Manaphy, Kingdra, and Tornadus, it's a little bit worrisome that he hasn't been using that more and didn't use it more effectively in this game. It wasn't a bad week. He won. But in this league, it was only enough to hold the position he was at while a lot of people fluctuated around him with far more impressive wins or more devastating losses. I think Kote's great. I think you're going to see him do very well in his own conference, and I think right now the Leafeon are looking to be a solid playoff contender for that conference, but against like the stacked conference that they're going against, it seems to be somewhat middle-of-the-lane performance as he adapts to the format. Hopefully he can get that turned around and utilize the elements of his team more dramatically and impressively throughout the season and put up some bigger differential numbers across the board. The New Orleans Pelipers slide down to number 9 this week, They were number 7 last week, go down 2 places just because of another loss. Actually doing pretty well, being one of the, lower end teams that still has a positive differential at +2 for the season at this point. But the Pelipers are just having trouble kind of finding ground and getting grip. Aside from that big win against Swagalift's team the first week, which a lot of people at this point are calling a fluke, they really don't seem to be able to capitalize on all of the power their team has. Most likely this is coming from John's lack of familiarity with the Pokemon he's using. He has been putting in extra work in the off weeks, trying to get in practices here and there with the team. And I think the familiarity is growing, but now he's starting to run into teams that have faced his players in the past and know their weaknesses, and he's going to have to realize that he has to counter game a lot harder. And it's an unfortunate issue of catch-up this week, He's not catching up to the other players as much as he needs to, despite having a lot of great things going for him. Really, he's not as far behind as the stats make it seem. I would say both of his losses so far have really come down to just 1 or 2, unfortunate misplays for him that have worked against him. But in the GBA, where your entire team has to work as a structure, taking out one link and making one bad decision really can cost you games and slide you down, which is what's happened to them. Do you believe in miracles? Well, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to, because I wouldn't say it was a miracle the Hawlucha won, but it was still pretty damn impressive when you consider how threatening the Sharpedos were as of last week. However, Fizz took advantage of an unfortunate disconnect to really change the way the momentum of the match was going. Before the disconnect, it seemed to be fairly strongly in the Sharpedos' favor, but afterwards, he just came in with a very confident gameplay, confident switches as he became, as he used the familiarity he had gotten with his opponent beforehand. And that does say something about disconnects and the way they do affect the outcome of these matches, but it also says something about possibly why the Hawlucha have been struggling so much this year. And it seems to be a lot of unfamiliarity with the coaches he's going against, unfamiliarity with the 6th gen environment, as is evident by the fact that he was running T-Wave on an Assault Vest set. And, this could be the turning point where the Hawluchas start to get their stride and they become comfortable in what they're doing and really turn things around. He did a great job isolating a very common weakness that the Sharpedos had in the fact that the versatility of Aerodactyl, which normally you don't see, could put major holes and do major damage to that team, and that's exactly what he did. I don't think anyone really took Aerodactyl too seriously in the draft, but this week it put in just massive numbers, which actually have it in the top 10 for the MVPs of this week in 1 week. That's great. That's just pure excellent coaching, bringing it in on the right opportunities, whether they be obvious or not, and just putting down the enemy, which is what he did. And it's absolutely why the Hawlucha deserved to go up pretty hefty in my ranks, all the way up to number 10. It's going to be interesting to see if this is the meteoric rise of the Hawlucha, or if this was just, Fizz being able to capitalize on the shifted momentum of a disconnect. I personally want to believe that this is the meteoric rise and that Fizz is going to do great things, but it's going to be rough when you consider he's in a very intense conference, and he does still have a lot of ring rust to get used to. Hopefully he does well and he moves further up in the rankings throughout the weeks, but as it stands, just a great week for him, and I was really glad to see him win, and very impressed by him. Go Fizz! The New York Yankees dropped fairly significantly to the number 11 spot this week, falling down after what I think was a predictable and expected loss for the most part. They're not a bad team, Shady's not a bad coach, but this is a week where it's going to have to serve as a wake-up call for him. In a super competitive league where counter-teaming and strategizing is a main point as much as the actual battles, Shady's going to have to learn that he has to put in the time. If you watch his video, he mentions very early on that he planned the team 5 minutes ahead, whereas Swagalift put several days of thought and practice into his match ready for it. And if Shady's just going to keep coming to matches at the last minute, I don't think the Mankeys are going to fare well for it. And that's a big part of the reason why they dropped as much as they did. He's going to have to learn, like I said, to put in the homework, do the extra work, find time. He's also going to have to learn to not fall for predictable setups. Last week, falling for the defog, Defiant boost. This week, falling for several basic 1, 2, 3 switches, like letting Swag get in Landorus on Golbat and thinking he could take that move. Also just basic things like not coming prepared. He brought a Golbat and didn't have Brave Bird on it. Real no offensive options besides the Super Fang, which just isn't enough. Shady didn't do his homework. He didn't plan ahead, and as a result, his team got really beat. I think his overall, outside GBA schedule might be catching up to him, and I think it could cost him some more matches in the upcoming weeks. I don't expect to see him bounce back immediately, maybe a little bit later in the season, but by then, it might be too late for them. The Grey Bulls came out, and again, they had another loss, not performing that well. Obviously, it's going to cause them to drop a little bit more, putting them down at about the 12 range, bottom of the barrel kind of stuff. It wasn't a terrible week, and it wasn't a total loss for them. I do think the deduction of Gardevoir's choice item based off the previous plays was good, and if Kyle can start to pick up on that kind of thing and apply it earlier in the matches, it's going to help him out a lot. But as far as this goes, it was just a wash week. I mean, he got outplayed pretty much start to bottom. I don't think he played poorly, just not as well as the opponent, and sometimes that's all it takes. I mean, you don't play well enough, you're going to lose. Unfortunately, they did. I don't think they're out of this. I think they've got a couple of matches that are more close in their projected skill range coming up to help boost numbers and boost confidence and put them back in the running for a lot of things. Expect to see them go up a little bit as the season goes on. They try. They put in the work. It's just right now the skill's not there and the team structure is not quite solid enough. The Escavaliers are staying at the bottom of the rankings yet another week, and this one just came down to not really recognizing the importance of their win conditions and the threats that the opponent had against them, as well as not coming prepared for those threats. There's no reason they shouldn't have been running Hidden Power Fire on Gardevoir to catch that Mega Scizor in the multitude of times that it was brought in. If you look at the MVP stats, Mega Scizor has just been putting up huge numbers week after week, even in the first week when Kote lost. However, the fact that he didn't run Hidden Power, as a means to catch it in on a very obvious switch is a little bit worrisome. There's some talk that it's really just a quality of team issue, but right now I think a bigger issue is not coming prepared and really noticing what his win conditions are going to be and how to use them. He's been wasting Moltres several weeks in a row when, again, Moltres was a hugely important player this week. While it's not going to take a hit from a Scizor, it might be able to with the proper investment and having that speed and fire to take it out at the end after it takes a hit would have helped change a lot of things about this game. But instead he used it early and it didn't really work for him, didn't really do anything for him. And then once that was out of the way, he didn't have a Scizor option. And that's just not really an acceptable way to come into a match. You gotta plan ahead a little bit more and really look at the numbers that the team is putting up and think about how they got there. That Scizor got that many kills for a reason, and it's most likely because it's the main offensive threat of that team. While there are other offensive threats to look at, you have to factor that, and you have to prepare for that. You can't just assume he's not going to bring it because it doesn't necessarily match up against the team. Because in this case, while it didn't have super great options to take down everything, it didn't have a problem taking down anything, and that's really more than enough. Nexus is really going to have to reevaluate his strategy coming into the matches in future weeks and really think about what he's going to bring and maybe some less common sets for him. Unfortunately, another loss for the 0-3 Jasmine keeps them at the bottom of the rankings at 14. I think the team has some potential, it just isn't realized, and they're having a really hard time. They have faced some decently competent threats, some heavy hitters, and they don't have an easy match for a little while. But I was a little bit more impressed by them this week. You know, Cooper running some more unique sets like Thief Hitmontop, which is marking the return of Thief Hitmontop to the GBA after the Sawsbucks used them last season, and I think he used it well. I think he came in with some decent enough plans and slight variations in creativity, but it's still just a problem of lacking the power and the options to do things. You know, Sing Chansey was a big thing, and it was a really good use of a surprise tactic that no one would expect, and it would have worked except for the fact that Chansey doesn't have any way to capitalize on that, and you have to bank on multiple turns of sleep. While that utility is great, without the immediate offensive power to complement it, it's not going to win you games, and that's what we saw happen. He got the Sing off, he was able to safely get the Gallade in, but he had to use turns to set up to be able to do damage to take things out because he doesn't have an overwhelming amount of offensive power. And unfortunately, he just didn't have the time to use the setup and get all of that going. That's a real problem. Cooper's going to have to figure this out. I think he's smart enough to, and I think he's definitely getting better, but unfortunately everybody else just seems to be slightly ahead of him, and it's a real catch-up game for him as well.
Alright, for week 4, we have a lot of really interesting matches. Most of them are very close, actually. First match of the week is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelix at the Arizona Deoxys. This is a tough one. I'm pretty confident that Gubbs has the best team in the league, but I've been really impressed by Swag's ability to deconstruct the enemy teams and take them down these past couple of weeks. However, Gubbs has an incredibly tight core of things that are going to be really hard to get through. I'm going to go ahead and give this one to the Steelix just because I think Swagalith is more likely to come out swinging with something ridiculous that could absolutely break the normal control of the match that Gubbs has. I also think most likely he's going to have answers for some of the things that have plagued the other teams in the past couple of weeks, like Snorlax and its inability to die. So I'm going to give that one to the Steelix. Probably a pretty close match, though. 2-0, somewhere around that. Next up, the Cleveland Cavaliers at the Atlanta Hawluchas. I'm going to give this one to the Hawluchas. Fizz, I want to believe very much, is on the rise. I tried the past 2 weeks to get behind Nexus and the Cavaliers, and so far the gameplay just hasn't been there. I think he's struggling with the format a little bit, and I'm not necessarily sure he's going to pick it up this week, whereas I think coming off of a win, Fizz is going to be running pretty high and is going to have gotten better at understanding the format and shaking off some of his rust as far as not being as active in 6th Gen competitive as he was. So I'm going to give that one to the Hawluchas. Probably a close match. Again, maybe another 2-0, even a 1-0 in the Hawluchas' favor. Third match of the week, Utah Jasmine and Chicago Grand Bulls. I actually have a very hard time figuring out who's going to win this match. The Jasmine have a great wall core. Well, not even a real wall core. They have a lot of bulk. And the Grand Bulls only have 2 heavy hitters, the Special Latios and the Physical Kabutops if it's in the rain. And I'm not 100% sure if they can break through. However, Psyshock on Latios is going to do an amazing job of tearing down like Chansey and things like that, which would probably be the only dedicated thing that the Jasmine would have to stop that particular poke. Whereas the Jasmine don't have one strong thing to go. They're really going to have to work as a team and just chip away at the things the Grand Bulls are going to be bringing if they want to win that. I'm going to give this one to the Grand Bulls, slight victory, just because as of yet, I've said it plenty of times, the Jasmine haven't really shown the ability to get an offense going and lock it down. Whereas while the Grand Bulls aren't doing great this season either, we have seen them do it in the past. And I do think they have the power to do it at least against the Jasmine this week. Next up, Boston Red Sox at LA Nido Kings. I'm going to go with the Nido Kings on this one. I think Crobat for the wins got a pretty obvious power advantage in what he's got. I think Nick's going to bring more interesting things, and he's going to be very prepared for what the Neo Kings have. I'm just not sure it's going to be enough against the power he's facing. So far, Nick's been doing excellent work against expansion teams, but he hasn't really been able to get over the hurdles of the expansion teams having lower priority draft and quality there, as we saw, in his previous loss. So I'm going to give that one to the Neo Kings. Probably another 2-0. Pretty straightforward deal. Next up, New York Yankees at Milwaukee Sawsbucks. I'm going to give this one pretty confidently to the Sawsbucks. I think it could be as much as a 4-0 in their favor. I think he's got a lot of answers for virtually everything that the Yankees have. And as I said in the video earlier, the Yankees just haven't been putting in that extra work to make up for the other team's abilities to pick them apart. I think Magnitude's going to really use the format to his advantage, have a lot of checks for everything that Shady has, and I just don't expect to see Shady coming out with specific tailored threats to take down the bulk that the Sawsbucks have, especially as Shady has an incredibly difficult time dealing with bulk, as anyone who watches his video knows. Next up is Toronto Maple Leafeons at the New Orleans Pelipers. Slight edge to the Leafeons here. Cote has just been doing consistent battling throughout the year, and he's got that really frightening rain team, but he hasn't actually used it yet. This could be the best week possible to use it, as the Pelipers only have one solid water resist and several things on their team that are flat out weak to water, and the rest taking it neutral. If he can get that off the ground, he can do serious work with Kingdra, Manaphy, even just, standard hurricane abuse with Tornadus is going to do work on several things that the Pelipers have. I think Pokemon's been doing a great job throughout the season, but I think he's struggling and playing a lot of catch-up, not just in getting the pokes, but in getting familiar with the format and really understanding just how much it has to be planned out to take down your enemy. I think he can do it, but like I said, he's playing catch-up, and he's playing catch-up against a lot of good teams very early on in the season. I think later on he's going to bounce back. He's got the power for the team. It's just a matter of familiarity with the team and the format. I don't think this is necessarily going to be another week unless he comes out with some really great strategies. I'm going to give this one to the Leafeons 3-0. I think it's a fairly confident win. Pelipers have the power to put in damage, but I'm just not sure they'll get the opportunity if Cote plays it right. Last match of the week is the Oklahoma City Thunderous at the San Jose Sharpedos. This is going to be a really good match. It should be a very close match if it goes anything like their previous matches did last season. I think it's two very confident people. I'm going to give the edge to the Oklahoma City Thunderous on this one. While I think the San Jose Sharpedos have more raw power and the ability to put in huge amounts of damage on the Thunderous, I think Hat is just, in general, a slightly better planner and strategist as far as thinking about what he needs to bring to the match, whereas the Sharpedos have just really done a very good job of constructing a solid team that happens to function competently every week. I think Tom can come in and really abuse specific sets well this week if he does put in that extra effort, and it could lock him a pretty decent win. I think it's going to be close, not because of any disparities in anything, but just because it's two fairly good battlers with different styles that happen to meet on fairly equal terms. So again, I'm going to say Oklahoma City Thunderous 2-0. That's going to be all my predictions for this week. That's going to wrap up the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you have any comments, criticisms, critiques, advice, suggestions, questions, please leave a comment below. I do try very hard to read pretty much all of them and respond to as many of them as I can, as well as most of the other GBA coaches tend to go through there and leave their own comments and watch the videos. Let me know what your predictions are, how you think the matches are going to go down this week. Let me know what you think your own power rankings are. If you disagree and you really think some teams need to be higher or lower, let me know. I'd love to talk to you and hear your input on it. And hey, it may even help me, reconsider some teams and reformulate my own ideas as of next week. Thank you so much for watching the video. You guys are great. The GBA is awesome fun. I look forward to all of these matches this week. I think it's going to be a really good one. See you later, guys.